So welcome to our first Virtual Meeting Revolution webinar. This is the first in a series of 5 webinars that we'll be running with my colleagues at Ideas on Stage, trying to help everybody to understand why many virtual meetings fail and how we can make them succeed. And to do that, we do need to change a number of things about the way we do them. Now, this is actually inspired partly by our Business Presentation Revolution course. Because for those of you who don't know us at Ideas on Stage, we've been trying to revolutionize the world of business presentations for around about the last 10 years. And you can see that I'm surrounded by a lot of presentation type books here. What we've found is that over the years, we've actually been helping more and more clients to prepare meetings. Not just online meetings, but physical meetings, conferences, events. And what's interesting when you're organizing a business event is to try to make sure that you only use presentations when you really need a presentation. And it's actually very much the same in meetings, even online meetings. So a lot of what we see here is going to be inspired by the things we've learned and the things that we've taught over the years in terms of business presentations, but also we'll find that there's a lot of interesting, new, very meeting-specific things which will be helpful, we hope, for you during the current situation where many of us are forced to work at home, some of us for the first time, and probably in the after-crisis situation where we may find that for some time we're actually going to be working at home and doing online meetings a lot more than we did before. So we believe this will be helpful. If you're here, I hope that means that you believe it's helpful too. And we really look forward to your feedback after this webinar so that we can make the next ones even more useful for you. So my name is Phil, and I'm one of the co-founders and the Chief Inspiration Officer at Ideas on Stage. So you're stuck with me for this particular webinar, but the next one will be delivered by somebody else. And I hope that you'll be able to join us again next week if you find this one at all interesting. So let's start by going through one or two very simple basics of this meeting. So for those of you who weren't there a little bit earlier, when you those who arrived early, I had said everybody is going to be on mute. And the reason for that is that we're expecting anywhere up to 50, 60 people for this webinar. And we all know that some of us have got kids and pets in the background. So if we are not all on mute, then the sound quality might not be so good for everybody. So that's actually one really important first lesson about virtual meetings is when you're not speaking, make sure that you're on mute so that everyone doesn't hear your kids screaming in the background. It's useful, however, to make things as interactive as possible. Now, in a webinar where everybody else is muted, the possibility for interaction is a little bit more limited than it would be in a meeting with 2 or 3 people. However, that doesn't stop interaction completely. So we have the group chat. So for those of you who don't know Zoom yet, try to locate the chat icon. It may look different if you're looking at it in a different language. Try to find that. And if you have questions, please type your questions into the chat and we'll get to those a little bit later on in the call today. Also, I'll be asking you maybe some questions once or twice along the way, so please send your answers in using the chat there. And if I miss anything, my colleagues are online, and Michael in particular is going to be jumping in where necessary to tell me about important things that I might have missed. So thanks to Michael, thanks to you for being here. Let's get on with the meeting. So this is a virtual meeting, and I'm hoping it's going to be a successful virtual meeting for you. How do you feel about most virtual meetings? Are they actually really, really fantastic, fun, enjoyable, or are you ending up a little bit more like that when you're in front of your computer and listening to somebody speak in a boring, monotonous voice for about 2 hours at a time? So what I'd love to do, really to start, just to make sure that you can get into the chat function, is I'd like to hear from you what you really don't like about online meetings. Right? Could be just a teleconference, could be a video conference, could be a Zoom meeting, a Microsoft Teams meeting. Please go onto the chat and tell us what you don't like about it. And that could be what people are saying. It could be the purpose of the meeting. It could be technical issues. It could be bad slides. It could be anything. Okay, so first one I'm seeing, so somebody doesn't like seeing people's, not being able to see people's body language. And that's really important. It's very useful to be able to see what people are doing as well as just hearing their voice. That can give a lot of color to the communication. So that's a great point. Some bad slides, very clearly. What else I'm seeing? There's a lot coming in here. That's fantastic. Poor timekeeping. Okay, that's important. So we've got another 3 hours on this one, right? No. I'm only kidding. I'm only going to try and speak for about half an hour today. So that's important. Everyone talking at the same time. Doesn't that happen so often? Which is why being on mute is really important. Okay, I'm seeing a really important comment there. People doing online meetings just to show that they're actually doing something. So in fact, you're in the meeting and you end up thinking, why am I here? What is the purpose of this meeting? And many meetings would be a lot better if they were actually just an email. There's also, you miss the physical presence of face-to-face meetings, and that's absolutely true. I mean, I've been working in international companies for, oh God, longer than I care to remember, about 25 years now. And I always find that you can get on with people very well via telephone or via video conference as long as you've met them once. Not actually having met somebody does make it very difficult to have that connection with somebody. But it's true, you don't have the physical connection you have in the meetings. You can't share donuts, you can't talk about your coffee or whatever. But it doesn't mean that online meetings are always so bad. What else am I seeing here? People don't like necessarily seeing themselves on the screen. I actually find a lot of people in online video meetings nowadays are actually turning off their video. Now, is that because they don't want to see themselves or because they don't want other people to see them? I'm not quite sure. I did one call last week, a video call with one of my clients, and in fact we had to turn off the video because one of them was in the French countryside with low bandwidth, and so the video was actually causing a problem, and we turned the video off and the sound was fine. So that can be another reason to switch off the video. But if you can actually see somebody, and you can see their expressions, and you can see the gestures that they're making as they're communicating, can be so much more powerful. Okay, so I'm not going to try and repeat everything that everyone has said. I do encourage you to have a look at what other people are putting in the chat. That's really, really important. So thanks very much for all of your comments there, all of your thoughts about this. Now, it's important that we understand what is wrong about online meetings so that we can then fix them. So I'd like to propose not one, but 5 virtual meeting revolutions, which will really help us to make the next virtual meeting that we do a real success. So let's start with the first revolution. Always match the people and the purpose. This is very important. There are so many meetings where you think, maybe this meeting would be useful, but why am I here? Do they really need me? Or when you see other people who are in the meeting who actually don't need to be there. Or sometimes you'll see that, well, it's good for us to have a meeting, but actually the objective is really not linked to me or to what I need. So in some cases, you actually have a disconnect between the participants in the meeting and the objective. So always try to match the purpose and the people. The second revolution is that we should really not pollute meetings with unnecessary presentations. Now, this might sound strange, right? I am known as a presentation specialist. I live and breathe presentations. I write speeches, I help people with slides, I help people to prepare their presentations, and I'm telling you that you shouldn't be presenting if you can help it in a meeting. I know, it's interesting, it's a bit of a paradox, but it's true. And I'm going to come back to that just a little bit later on in this call. Revolution number 3 is that you should always aim for attention and interaction. In far too many meetings, it ends up being a monologue full of information. Now, this might sound strange because today, because it is a webinar, pretty much is a monologue. So you're actually going to be listening to me for the next half an hour and not anybody else, unless Michael puts a word in here or there. But in most online meetings where we have a smaller group and where everybody is able to talk, you still end up having a monologue very often. And it's where one person is just trying to share a load of information with loads of other people. And therefore attention ends up being a problem because we don't like that much information. We like interaction. So always try to make it as interactive as possible and try to make sure you get people's attention from start to finish. Otherwise, it's not going to work very well. Revolution number 4 is all about the way you use documents and slides. So if you are going to use slides in an online meeting, and sometimes you can use slides very usefully in an online meeting for guiding a discussion, even if you're not actually doing a one-to-many presentation. You can also use slides to grab people's attention and keep their attention by putting up something surprising, something different, something orange, whatever it might be. But keep things going, stop people being bored. But use those slides for attention, not for information. It's very important we understand, and this goes the same for any presentation, we forget most of what we hear really quickly. So it is important to give a document, sometimes before, sometimes during, sometimes after a meeting, which will actually help people to get the information, to understand what they need to know, and then to work out what they need to do with it. So you may find yourself preparing documents before, and also a document after the meeting. And the last revolution is it's always important to facilitate meetings. And the role of the meeting facilitator is vital. And the facilitator doesn't just start when the meeting begins. The facilitator has to plan the meeting. The facilitator has to make sure that any documents that need to be produced have been produced right at the start. And that people have read them first. And also after the meeting, it's important that the facilitator prepares the meeting minutes so that the people who were there remember what was said, and the people who weren't there understand what was said. And this is very important. And this goes for any kind of meeting, even physical meetings. Far too many people attend far too many meetings in companies simply because they know there will be no minutes afterwards. Therefore, if they're not in the meeting, they're out of the loop. They don't know what's been said. They don't know what's been decided. If they know that a meeting will have proper minutes, so that after the meeting, they can simply read it, take 5 minutes, read the minutes, find out what was said, what was decided, who decided what, well then, they might not feel the need to actually be in the meeting. So that means people attend fewer meetings, so they have more time to actually do work. And also the meetings have fewer people in them, which generally means they're more productive too. So that's 5 really important revolutions. And we'll be coming back to some of these in some of our other webinars. We don't have time to do everything today. We're just really going to dive into the beginning today. But I wanted to make this an introduction which makes you interested in knowing more, which makes you think, actually, there's a lot to learn about virtual meetings. It's not because I can set up my Skype or my Zoom that I really know how to do this. There's actually an art behind it. And in fact, there are 5 steps to virtual meeting success, which I'd like to share with you. And they correspond very well with these 5 revolutions. The first step is the foundation step. When you're building any kind of building, if you don't have a firm foundation, then the building is likely to fall apart. The foundation phase is where you understand all of the things you need to know about the situation, about the context, about your objectives, before you start thinking about what to do in your meeting. Once you've got that, you can then move into the ideation phase where you brainstorm, you think to yourself, or you think with colleagues, what can we do in this meeting? How can we make it successful? How can we achieve those objectives? Is it with maybe a presentation? Is it with a brainstorm, a discussion, some breakout rooms? What could it be? What can help us to keep people's attention, to make it interactive, and to achieve our objectives? Once you've done that brainstorming, you can then sort out the agenda for your meeting. Who's going to do what? Who's going to say what? How long is it going to take? So this is where you move into the creation phase, and you put all of these different ideas into a suitable order, and that creates the agenda for your meeting. And it should be a meeting which is a lot more interesting and interactive than if you hadn't done the first couple of steps. Afterwards, you may need to think, okay, maybe I need some supporting documents. Maybe I need some slides at some point, either for a presentation or just to guide the agenda. Maybe I also need some documents. Is there something people need to read before the meeting? Is there something that they need to read during the meeting? Because yes, we can actually give people stuff to read during a meeting, give them a time to read it, and then come back and discuss it afterwards. Far more productive than having somebody talk and people forget what they're saying. The last step is then the connection. So this is where you're actually running the meeting, facilitating that meeting, and making sure that it is successful. So that's the final stage. Now, these are the same 5 stages that we teach in our Business Presentation Revolution course as well. What's in the stages is, of course, rather different, and in particular, in the first 2. What you will see, however, is that these revolutions I shared a few minutes ago correspond almost exactly with these 5 phases. So in the first phase, in foundation, you really do need to match the people with the purpose of the meeting. In the ideation phase, you need to make sure that you are aiming for the interaction, but you're not putting in unnecessary presentation if you can help it. In the creation phase, you really need to focus on making it interactive and on grabbing and keeping people's attention throughout. That's really important. In the illustration phase, that's where you focus on using documents for information and slides for attention. And then finally, when we get into the connection phase, when we're actually running and hopefully succeeding that meeting, that's where the facilitator needs to make sure that the meeting is a success. So these are a number of really important steps. Now, today, I'm not going to go through, for example, the illustration phase. We have a separate webinar on that in a few weeks. So do check up on that if you're interested in what do I need to do regarding how do I use slides? How can I use slides effectively in an online meeting? And I'm not going to go into the connection phase because the connection phase is important. There are very many aspects to this. We have a particular webinar about facilitating, so how to be a successful online meeting facilitator before, during, and after. And we also have one just next week, which my colleague Michael will be running, about how to speak in an online meeting. So he'll be able to tell you all of the things that I'm doing badly today. And I'm not going to go into how to set up your home office, how to set up your microphone, how to set up your camera, what to wear. These are things which are important. For example, I have a lot of lovely blue and white striped shirts, which I really, really like. But if I were to put one on for this kind of meeting, on an online meeting, well, you'll see, probably many of you will see that actually this creates a really nasty noir type effect on your screen. So I'm just having to leave those in the wardrobe for now and just use a single color shirt. So that is the kind of thing that you will be needing to understand in an online meeting. Sometimes it's the little things that actually make a big difference. But I'm not going to go into any more detail of that today. What I am going to go through in particular is the first 2 steps, foundation and the ideation. Because if we actually start off on the right foot, then we'll be ready to succeed in our meetings. So let's move into that foundation phase and let's build the foundation. And the foundation is all based on a cop. So you've probably heard the expression good cop, bad cop. Now, good cop, bad cop, that generally refers to the typical thing you see in American TV series where there are 2 policemen interviewing somebody. One of them appears to be quite nice and the other one appears to be really nasty and possibly a little bit violent. And it's a strategy which aims to allow the good cop to get more out of the person that they're actually talking to. Now, I'm not suggesting that this is the good way that you should run your meetings, right? Do not have 2 facilitators, one of whom is really nasty and aggressive, and the other one who seems to be really, really nice and gentle. Not the aim. COP is one of these acronyms that I like so much. So COP actually stands for context, objectives, and participants. And it's really important that you study these carefully and make sure that they are in coordination with each other. So you always want to start, first of all, if you want to make a good COP, you want to start with the context. Why are you having this meeting? What is your business's context? What is the business situation that leads you to have this meeting? All of that's really important. Then you can move into the two other pieces. Now, sometimes you work on the objectives and then you choose the participants. So for example, you want to be having a project meeting where you need to have approval to go into the next phase of your project. So your objective is obtain approval for the next phase. Who are the participants that need to be there? Probably your project board, maybe your sponsor, maybe you need one or two of the stakeholders. That's a choice you may need to make. Do you need the whole of the project team there? Possibly, possibly not. Again, only invite the people that you need. But this is the kind of situation where you choose the objective and then you choose the participants based on that objective, based on the context. There's another situation where you do it the other way around, and that's where you have a context and, well, you have your team, you're a manager, you have 10 people in your team, and those are going to be the participants. You can't change that. You can't just say, well, we'll leave Michael out because we don't need him in this meeting, because then he'll feel left out. So in some cases, you've got a team and you need everybody to be in that meeting. So once you've understood the business context and the participants, then you would think, okay, with those participants in that context, what are the objectives for this meeting? So we always start with the context, but then sometimes you'll choose the objectives and then the participants. Sometimes you'll choose the participants and then the objectives. What you don't want to do is to forget about any of them, because you don't want people to be sitting in meetings where they're thinking, why am I here? And you also don't want to have an objective which is missed because you're missing some of the key people. So it may not take you very long to understand what is the context, what are the objectives, and which participants do I need. But it's very important to make sure you can have that coordination between those three aspects. So remember, in the foundation phase, always match the people to the purpose. That is vital, and that's a really important revolution. So now if we move into the ideation phase, this is where the revolution is not to pollute meetings with unnecessary presentations. And this is where we try to think, like, how can I make this meeting as enjoyable, as interactive, as attention-seeking as possible? It was Samuel Johnson who said, the key to learning is the art of learning is the art of attention. Something similar to that. And so it's very important to understand that if you want people to remember something, you need their attention. And in a meeting, if you're in a meeting room with people, you can see when somebody is consulting their telephone, right? You can see that somebody's got their phone out and they're going to be looking at, you don't know if they're looking at Facebook or the share price, but you can see they're not paying attention. In an online meeting, sometimes you actually don't always see people. So for example, there are more than 30 people online right now. I can't see you all. In fact, I can't see any of you. So some of you might be reading the newspaper, some of you might be playing table tennis, or some of you might be playing Candy Crush. I don't know. And the thing is, you know that I don't know. You know that I can't see what you're doing. And therefore, keeping people's attention in that kind of situation is even more difficult than it is in a live meeting or a live presentation. So you've really got to plan for attention. You've got to plan to keep people involved. So I'm going to give you some ice cream. That's surprising, isn't it? You did not expect ice cream in this kind of webinar, but hey, the sun is shining, the sky is blue. What better than a nice ice cream? Okay, Michael is probably going to say beer, but let's start with an ice cream. So based on our COP, remember our context, our objectives, and our participants, what flavor of virtual meeting is going to be right for us? So when we're running our virtual meeting revolution training courses, we will actually be going through a kind of a brainstorm at this phase and taking some case studies and thinking what works best in these situations. So there are 5 main types that we've been able to come up with. Starts with a webcast. So this is where you have no interaction whatsoever. It could be like the chief executive of a big Fortune 500 or CAC 40 or FTSE 100 company who is sending an address, like a video address, to the whole of the workforce. So that is where there is no possibility for interaction. There is no chat. Nobody else is able to speak. It's just one person or maybe a couple of people who are doing a kind of broadcast. So that happens sometimes. Sometimes it's the right choice. It's always better if you can make things a bit more interactive if you can. Okay. Michael has put something interesting on the chat here, so it's always nice to see the interaction here. Flavors are better in ice cream than in beer. That is true, but Belgian beers have a number of very interesting flavors, so you might want to be checking some of that one. I think you need to know your Belgian beers a little better. When it comes to a webinar, so this is a webinar. You are currently participating in a webinar, and yes, it's kind of mostly one-to-many. However, you do want to try to make it as interactive as possible. In business, most times we won't be delivering webinars. In fact, honestly, most of the people online today, I'm pretty sure most of you will not be doing what I'm doing right now and delivering a kind of webinar. Some of you may. I hope you get some useful tips. But we're very often in business meetings where we actually have an aim to get a decision. That's a different type of meeting. Often a lot more interactive. Even more is where we're actually aiming to collaborate. So a couple of weeks ago, for example, with my colleagues, we had an online meeting. It actually lasted 3 hours with a break, where we were brainstorming on all of the different things we could do in these webinars. So that was a collaborative meeting with a facilitator, and in that case it was Michael, and he did a fantastic job doing it. And the rest of us, those of us who were able to be online, just a few of us, were able then to interact, to give ideas, he was taking notes, etc. And that has helped us to prepare these webinars. That's a collaboration meeting. And the last type is, well, it's a kind of a team meeting. And at a time like this, when a lot of us are working remotely for the first time, when we're having to deal with our kids at home, when we're having to deal with the news, with a health emergency, sometimes with members of our family that need help, but we can't visit for sanitary reasons. We're all dealing with a lot of stuff right now. So actually building community within your teams is more important now than it ever has been before. So, for example, at Ideas on Stage, we're actually now running a daily call. We're not talking business in that time, right? It's just not possible. We're just seeing how everybody is, giving everyone a chance to catch up, a chance to see some familiar faces, and just see how everyone's doing and whether everyone's well, and catch up with news and discuss the news and things like that. And there is no real agenda for that kind of meeting. We do try to structure it a little bit, but in general, it's an exchange. We don't aim to take a decision. We don't aim to build anything. We just aim to build community. And sometimes those are the most important meetings we're doing right now. Okay? So if we try to plot those on a graph, where we plot the number of participants on the horizontal axis and then the level of interaction on the vertical axis, then what you'll see is it generally follows a kind of very quick digressive curve, where the fewer participants, the more interactive it can be. The more participants, the harder it is to have that interaction. So if we plot those 5 types, we start off with the team meeting, which can be 2, 3, 5, 10 people. Try not to have too many people online or it can get difficult. But there, you really can making it really interactive, listening to everybody, asking questions, asking how their kids are, how their pets are, and making it a real community exercise. A little bit further down the curve, you have the kind of collaboration meeting. And this is where you're going to be really trying to be interactive, trying to work together for it, but it may be a little bit less interactive than a situation where everybody is talking for like 5 minutes at a time about how their dog is doing. In a decision meeting, You'll generally find that there are fewer people who speak in that meeting. There may be a project manager, for example, or a budget manager or a finance manager who's speaking, and then other people who are asking questions, but it's generally kind of led by one person who's doing a lot of the talking. Then we get into a webinar. That's where we are now, and that's where I'm doing all of the talking. And we try to make it interactive using other means, using the chat, for example. But it's not so easy to have everybody able to talk, because then the sound quality would be quite difficult for everyone. And then, of course, you get into the webcast, where there's basically practically no interaction. So for your meeting, based on your COP, based on the context, the objectives of the participants, which one works best? And how can you make it succeed? Now, what do you put in that meeting? I'd like to share the Jeff Bezos method. Some of you may know this already. At Amazon, they have a particular way of running meetings. And this has inspired actually many other companies. Certainly we followed this. We've even applied this in French banks, for example. And sometimes if they can do it, anybody can. But it works very, very well. So Jeff's approach actually can be summarized by 2-1-0. 2 is never have a team or never have a meeting so big that you can't feed everybody with 2 pizzas. Now think about that for a moment. How many people is that? It depends on the size of the pizza. But basically his point is, if you need far too many people, then that meeting is not going to be productive. So meetings are much better with only a limited number of people. The 1 is 1 document. So here I've just put a document, which is the handout we give in our Business Presentation Revolution course. But 1 document. It usually, in Amazon meetings, it's 6 pages, but it's a real document. It's not a PowerPoint. It is a Word type document with real paragraphs, with real pages of text, but it's in a standard format that everybody in the company knows. And this will tell them everything they need to know. Now, they don't always send this in advance of the meeting. What they'll actually do in the meeting is they will start off by reading it. And it may take 10 minutes. Sometimes it even takes half an hour. And they're sitting there silently reading the document, because they know that that's the most effective and most efficient way for them to get all of the information they need to know about the subject. Once they've got all of that, then they can discuss. But the 0 is 0 presentations. In a meeting in Amazon, there will never be a presentation. This doesn't just mean there's no PowerPoint. It means that nobody in the meeting is going to get up and actually give a monologue to people. It just doesn't happen. So after the reading, people will ask questions, make sure they've properly understood, discuss the points they need to discuss, take the decisions they need to take, and then leave. And what you find is that people actually spend less time in meetings despite that reading time at the beginning. And it works extremely well. So we can apply that to online meetings and imagine, what should I get people to read before the meeting? And if not, can I get them to read something during the meeting? So let's have a think about that when we think about the ingredients that we might want to put in. Because we're in the ideation phase here. We're going to come up with all sorts of ingredients we can put into our meeting. And presentation is the last one. So we want to start off by thinking, okay, at what point can we have a discussion? Right? At what point can we have a discussion in this meeting? If it's not a webcast, if it's not a webinar, is there a point where we need to open up and have a discussion where everybody can say their thing and everybody can ask questions? You can't always have a vocal discussion. Today, it's not possible, unfortunately, for sound reasons, but you can find other ways to interact. So in some cases, you can ask people to put things in the chat, as we're doing today. In some cases, you can have a poll where you ask people to vote on something. We chose not to use those today, but we might use them in some of our other webinars, so watch out for that. There are all sorts of different things that you can be doing with all of these different technologies to have some way of interaction. And our partners at Bcast, for example, have a look at what they do. They're offering 3 months free at the moment. So that's Bcast, B-E-E-K-A-S-T. I'm sure Michael will be happy to type that into the chat for us. They're offering 3 months free. And it integrates with Microsoft Teams even. And with that, you do a lot of added value interaction during a meeting. So that's well worth looking at. Thank you, Mike. You also may decide that rather than a discussion, you might actually need to do a brainstorm. And that can be a text brainstorm, or it can be a vocal brainstorm using maybe a virtual whiteboard to come up with all sorts of ideas. That can be helpful in a lot of meetings, sometimes in decision, sometimes in collaboration type meetings. As I mentioned before with the Amazon approach, sometimes just some quiet reading is well worth doing, even if it's just one page. Maybe you're doing a quarterly financial review and you just want to share some numbers with people. Rather than share those on a slide, you may find it's actually better to give them a document. So it's possible to paste a document into the chat here, for example, in Zoom, or to share a document directly with participants in various other technologies. And then people can just spend 5 minutes reading that document, and then you can open it up for discussion afterwards. And sometimes, yes, silent reading is the most effective thing you can do in a meeting. And it's one of the best ways to get people to actually read the document, because if you send it to them by email, chances are they won't read it in time. And then the last ingredient is a presentation. If you can't do things with all of these other areas, well, you may find that even in a collaboration or a decision meeting, you may find there is a place for a presentation, but only ever use a presentation when one of the other methods is not appropriate. That should be your last resort. You may end up with a lot of it, but you should only do it when the others are not the best way to do it. So those are the ingredients I would recommend that you have in any kind of online meeting. But remember, in this section, remember the key revolution. Don't pollute meetings with unnecessary presentations. Make it interactive as much as possible, and the facilitator in many decision or collaboration type meetings generally shouldn't be the person who does at least half of the talking. So I'm going to stop there. Okay, I'm checking the time. I think it's about time I stopped in any case. I've talked for about half an hour, and that was what I was aiming to do. Like I said, we're going to be doing some other webinars which are going to focus on different aspects. So the facilitation, the illustration, and the kind of the home setup that you can use. And next week, we'll be talking about how to speak in an online meeting to keep people engaged, to get people engaged, and to be clear. What I'd like to do right now, and for whatever remaining time we have, is to answer your questions, because it may well be that you've got many questions. So I've not been able to follow all of the chat. So I don't know, Michael, have there been questions that we could answer already? And if there aren't, please type your questions into the chat. I'll be very happy to answer them.
Yes, hi Phil. Yes, we didn't get many questions actually during your seminar. There were a few from the intro that I just wanted a few comments that people made about difficulties in meetings during the introduction there. So one person said that often there's no eye contact with the camera itself when presenting, so this can be an issue. And also the position of the camera. Sometimes people can be thrown when the camera is often too high, or rather when it's too low, and so the presenter is looking down on the audience.
That's a really good point, Michael, yes. So I've tried to make sure my camera today is pretty much at eye level. I know if the camera is too low, then it just makes me look like I have more chins than I actually have. And if it's too high, then it becomes clear that I don't have as much hair as I would actually want. So the position of the camera is actually really important. What else, Michael?
2/3 up the screen, actually, for eyes, apparently. 2/3 up the screen is the best place for it. Another point is that often presenters can get distracted by the multiple video screens, which can...
You seem to have lost Michael for a moment there.
Yes, I have a 9-year-old boy. He's asking me some questions right as I'm speaking, obviously.
That does happen when you're at home. That's one of those things. I'm surprised I haven't had a tractor drive by my house and make a lot of noise. So these things do happen. So yeah, can you repeat that one, Michael, please? No, it looks like his son is taking.
Yes, I can still do this. So we have another question here. What about doing gamification during virtual meetings?
Absolutely. I mean, gamification is one of the very best ways to be collaborating and building something together. So this is one of the things we always try to build into our training courses, is to try to make sure that things are as enjoyable as possible, as interactive as possible. And gamification is a fantastic way to do that. A lot of the courses I deliver at HEC, for example, are in conjunction or just after another professor who is a specialist in serious games and who is able to take people through an actual simulation. And it's when you go through a situation, like building a meeting, like building a presentation, or trying to get out of a particular situation, you have a lot of fun doing it and you learn a lot by doing it. So yeah, I would fully agree. Gamification, any way you can build in a game or some kind of fun type activity which has a serious objective, yeah, definitely go for it. I think it's a great idea. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions from anyone?
I'm not seeing too many. Oh, hold on. Can I make an example of food? Oh, sorry. Good gamification. I was thinking food gamification sounds interesting.
That would work, you know, why not?
Good gamification. Can we have some examples? Well, I can't necessarily explain all of the ones that we do at HSC. Certainly in our presentation training courses, we do lots of examples where people actually have to build a presentation, but we have them pull an audience out of a hat. So, for example, with executives from a large company, we will have one group pull out a group of like senior executives or like the board of the company. Another table might have to present to some students. Another table might have to present to Greenpeace or some other non-governmental organization. So basically, they will have to pull out, to choose at random an audience and also a subject for their presentation. And then they actually have to go through and build that throughout the course. And sometimes we will change things. Sometimes after a little bit of work, we will actually say that, well, sometimes someone needs to change group, or sometimes we'll say, actually, things have changed. Your context has changed, therefore you need to rethink your presentation. And going through that over a period of 2 or 3 days can be quite fun for the trainer, but absolutely fantastic for the participants, because they really do get to understand and to simulate a real business presentation situation. And we're trying to build similar things in for the meeting trainings that we're doing too. I hope that's a reasonably useful example. I see another couple of examples coming in.
Yes, the use of breakout rooms during meetings. Is it possible on online meetings?
Yeah, now we're using Zoom today. So Zoom is one of the technologies. There are many others. I did a webinar a couple of weeks ago using Livestorm, which is a very, very good solution. Zoom is one that we like because indeed, when you're having a meeting with a number of people, so doing this training online, for example, you can set up in advance, you can set up some breakout rooms. If you want, you can assign participants to specific breakout rooms, so that as the trainer or facilitator, you can then have a part in your meeting where you're going to put 3 or 4 people together in their own little kind of online conference, and then they can be doing something, and then after 10 minutes, the facilitator can drop in or drop out again. The facilitator can then bring them all back into the main conference, and they can play back the outcome of the brainstorm that they've done. And that can be really powerful, because if you want people to be brainstorming on something, it generally works better with 3 or 4 than it does with 7 or 8. So you can have 2 different groups if you've got 8 people and have them both brainstorming on either the same thing separately or on 2 different things. And that can be a very productive and a very interesting way to break up the flow and achieve more in your meeting. So I really like that idea, and the function in Zoom is fantastic to do that.
So we have another question here from Folliot, who says,
Ross. I think he said he had to leave, but let's take his question.
It's Ross. Okay, good. Raising the issue about how one can suddenly return and know where the meeting has progressed to. So I'm assuming he's talking about when you've gone into the breakout rooms, about coming back and being able to pick up where you've left off. I'm trying to understand the question. Could you Could you perhaps repost it there, Ross, please?
I think I've got it, Michael. I hope
Okay.
I've got it. And if not, Ross will certainly tell us about it, I'm sure. It's kind of where perhaps you're in a meeting and then an emergency phone call comes in, or like your dog escapes and you have to go and catch it or something like that. And then you maybe come back in 10 minutes later and you're not sure where you are in that meeting. So one of the recommendations that I have is always, when you're in a meeting, make sure the structure is clear, and make sure the structure is always clear regularly. So in this webinar, for example, I gave the kind of the structure of these five steps, and I said I was only going to go through the first two, and I did go through the first two and then open up for questions. But it's important, for example, if you've got 5 items on the agenda, you don't just show the agenda right at the start and never again, because people will wonder, are we on number 3? Are we on number 4? I don't know. And that's even if they hadn't had to go out like Ross did. So it is very important, as much as possible, when you're moving from item 2 to item 3, you show the agenda again, you show that you're moving from item 2 to item 3, and that way nobody ever feels lost. And if someone does have to go out, well, when they come back in, they should very quickly be able to understand that. An analogy I like to use is radio commentary on sport. So whether it's football or cricket or rugby or tennis or any kind of sport, if you're listening on the radio, you can't see the score. So the radio commentators need to tell you the score regularly, so that somebody who just turns on their radio and tries to understand the score, they don't want to have to wait 10 minutes for someone to say, oh, it's 2-0 to Liverpool. So the commentators need to say that regularly. And when you're going through the meeting, you need to do the same. Always make sure it's clear where you are in that structure. So great question, Ross. Thanks very much for that. And I hope that you are well. Ross is himself, by the way, a presentation specialist, especially in the medical field. And I think his talents are in great need in many ways right at the moment. So Ross, it's great that you're able to be online. Have we got some more questions there, Michael?
Not right now. Still waiting for some more. So please don't be shy.
Okay. Well, we
have 10 minutes left, so please feel free to jump in with any questions about what you think. We have 2 more. So this is from Ross again. I think there should be different types of webinars.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah, and I mean, no 2 webinars are necessarily identical, and there are different types of webinar. It will depend really on how many people you've got, on what the objectives are that you have. In certain webinars, sometimes when I'm doing a kind of a web teaching session for one of the business schools I teach at, sometimes I'll have like 16 people online, and maybe at some point after a half an hour of presentation, I'll put them into a breakout room or 4 breakout rooms, have them do some stuff and then come back again. So it's kind of a mixture between the webinar and the collaboration. But it's important to understand the objectives and to understand the ingredients that I shared earlier on, and these 5 different ingredients there. In practically anything except a webcast where there's no interaction at all, you can have different doses of these. So think of these in terms of the ingredients in some kind of food, some kind of dish. You won't always put exactly the same amount of eggs or butter or flour, and you'll find that every cake is different, and therefore every presentation ends up being a little bit, every meeting ends up being a little bit different as well. So yes, there can be very many different ones. Do we have some, Ross, I think you got some other comments there as well. Michael, can you read those, please?
Yeah, so there's, yes, and I see the comment from Juliet Tournon as well. We'll get back to you about that. So just Ross goes on to give some examples. Some webinars can be more like lectures, some can be like discussions, some could be coaching, depending on size of the audience. Particularly for people who are new to this, he's been sending very clear instructions about signing on, screen issues such as moving camera around, mute and unmute as well as a common problem for him.
Absolutely. And in terms of the setup and the technical setup and the online etiquette, etc., we're going to be covering that in more detail in another webinar in a few weeks, where we're talking about how to set up your camera, but also how to set up a meeting to make sure that people are muted. And in the facilitation part, where I think that's the last of our 5 webinars. We'll certainly be going through the kind of the rules, just the things to say. So, for example, at the start of this meeting, for those of you who were there online at the start, I did say you're all going to be on mute. There's a reason for this. It's to preserve sound quality for everybody, but please interact with this. Simple things like that can actually help to make things work much better. And Ross, I'm sure you've got a whole load of other tips. So if you're going to be sharing anything on your own webinar at some point, if you're going to be doing one, I'd love to join, that's for sure. What was Juliet's question?
Yes. Hi there, Juliet. Nice to see that you joined us. So her question was about gamification references, any applications or things that could be used for gamification during webinars, team meetings.
I would love to be able to say, here is a list of suitable websites or suitable applications you could choose. I actually don't have them. The one thing I would say is investigate Bcast, so that was listed just above, where there are lots of things you can do with that to be interacting with people, but it's not really for gamification per se. For gamification, I would always encourage you to build something made to measure for your purpose in a particular situation. So I don't have a particular online resource to give you, but Michael, why don't we note that, and we'll try to get back to you afterwards. We'll do a little bit of research and see whether there are some suitable references, either books or online sites with ideas, etc., which we can give. Because I think it's a really useful question, and that could be for some other people too.
Absolutely, and as a medium which is obviously becoming more and more used, particularly this period, there are many ways we can be creative in online meetings and webinars, such as surveys, getting people to work in separate breakout groups, giving perhaps people tasks, on-the-spot improvisations, short pitches, for example, things like that. So there's lots of ways I think we could diversify and make online meetings and webinars more interactive and more interesting. It's just a question of trying stuff out. And that's the thing, right? You just got to try it out, see if it works or not. Absolutely. It's not just a technological issue, but it's also a creative idea too.
Okay.
All right, anyone else?
Thank you, Michael. I think there was one question there from Camille, which was there is, if I don't have time to produce good slides, what's best? Should I present with no slides? Well, it's always better to have no slides than to have bad slides. If you just have very bad slides or walls of words, then people will probably try to listen instead of read. Sorry, no, they'll probably read instead of listen because they can't do both at the same time. And they'll get to the bottom of the page and then they'll just wait until the page moves to the next one. And in the meantime, they'll switch off. So bad slides can really kill any presentation, but especially in an online meeting where you can't see the people, you can't see their reactions and you can't see whether they're doing something different. So if you don't have time to produce slides, not a problem. You can present without them, but you may find that a document is useful as something that people can take away, or something that people can read before. If you don't have time to do slides and documents, I would always say do the document, because that's something they can take away.
Right, another question here from Ashish Gupta. Is it possible to have an online timer for each speaker, especially in a team meeting, to allow everyone equal time in the beginning of a meeting? Sometimes it's easy to lose track of time when there's no physical interaction.
That is true. It's a very interesting point, and it's a very good question. I'm not aware in any of the tools that I've used, be it Teams or Skype for Business or Zoom or WebEx, I'm not aware of any kind of like countdown timer where you can count how long each person has spoken for. It's not like a chess match where you've got a limit per person that, or like a political debate where everyone has a particular allocated speaking time that they can't go over. What I would say is this is the role of the facilitator. It's important for the facilitator to make it clear to people how long they have, to give them, if they've been given 5 minutes, to give them a warning after 4 minutes, you've got 1 minute left, get to your conclusion, and to be very efficient in policing the time to make sure that you're not going to be overrunning, because time management is really important.
Can I just actually add to that, Phil? That's great. You could also allocate a timekeeper for each meeting. So you've got one person who's being chair or facilitating, and you actually assign another member of the group purely to be timekeeper. So you have different people participating, for example, at a fixed time of 3 minutes, that timekeeper takes care of timing every single participant. That way, you'll keep the time.
Absolutely. And we do that in our physical meetings, but it's possible to do it in online meetings as well. So I think that's all we've got time for. Had a lot of great questions, a lot of interest. So thanks very much for your time there. Just to conclude, I'm going to use the slide I like with the Winston Churchill, just saying this is not the end or even the beginning of the end, even though it's the end of this webinar. But it's perhaps just the end of the beginning, because this is the end of the first in a series of 5 webinars. For those of you who have French-speaking colleagues, we're going to be running the same webinars in French every Tuesday, so watch out for that. And you can find the details of that on our website. You can particularly find details of our next webinar, which is same time next week. And that is going to be given by Michael. So this time you'll actually get to see what it looks like as well. And he will be talking about how to speak online. So giving virtual speaking success and avoiding that kind of person you see on the screen there, who is basically just waiting for the meeting to be on.
Actually, my camera was on, Phil. Don't worry, they've all seen me.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that. Okay, so that's for next week. I hope many of you will be able to join, and we certainly won't be repeating this content. It's a whole lot of new stuff, and it's all inspired by our Virtual Meeting Revolution course, produced by the Ideas on Stage team. So if you need anything for your companies, if you need any training for your people, we're all stuck at home. We're all, in many cases, having to work from home. It's a great time to be trained. It's a great time to learn skills which will be helpful in these online meetings. But also, when we get back to the office, these kind of skills will be really useful also for producing presentations and for producing business meetings that will succeed as well. So that's what we're aiming to give to you during this time. We hope to see you online very, very soon. Thanks all for your time today, and we'll catch you again next week. Take care. Bye-bye.